In this video, we're going to look at making an adjustable grid of points. This is an example of the definition that we're going to make and an example of the grid of points. So here's a new Grasshopper window. So to start this definition, we're going to double click and we're going to type in REC for rectangle, and we want to make a rectangular grid. So this starts us off here with a grid in the XY plane of rectangles, and if we look through this component, if you hover over each one, you'll see what the input is asking for. So we have the base plane, which is the world's XY, we have the size in the X, the size in the Y, and the extent of the X and the extent of the Y. So we want to be able to control this grid, so we're going to just attach some sliders over here. So I'm going to double click, and I want my slider to go between 0 and I'm going to make it 50, but I'm going to start it at 5. So I'm going to say 0 dot dot 5 dot dot 50, and that will make my slider in integer increments between 0 and 50, and it gives it that starting value of 5. So I want 4 of these. So I am going to click and then push Alt, and I'm going to drag down, and that copies the component. So click, Alt, drag, click, Alt, drag, and now I have 4 of these sliders that I can plug in to each of these inputs. So if I zoom out over here, you can see my grid. Right now, each square is 10 in the X, 10 in the Y, and there are 10 of them in each direction. And if I slide these sliders, my grid changes. So for this one, I actually don't want a grid of cells, I want a grid of points. And so what I'm going to do is, so this outputs the cells, and it outputs the points. So what I'm going to do is double click and type PT for point, and I'm going to grab a point component, and I'm going to drag the point. So now I'm looking at the vertices of each of the cells. So now I have those, and I want to actually hide the rectangular grid, so I'm going to right click on this component, and I'm going to click on the preview command, and that turns that off. And so now I just see my points. So right now I've got a parametrically controlled grid of points. I can change the size of the cells in the X and the Y, and I can change the number of those points in the X and the Y. And actually, in this case, I want to have a square grid, or I want my cell size to be square. So rather than having 2 separate size sliders, I'm going to just take the X and I'm going to plug that into the Y also. And so now my grid is a square grid. So as I change my cell size, it changes both the X and the Y.